It started like any other evening in the Parker household, quiet, predictable, and comfortably routine. Mark Parker, a hard-working single father, had spent the last 16 years doing everything in his power to raise his son, Tyler, with love, discipline, and unwavering support. To anyone on the outside, they were just another father and son trying to make the best of life. But deep down, Mark always felt like something was off. Tyler wasn't like other kids his age. He was reserved, unusually quiet, and carried a certain weight in his eyes, something Mark could never quite put his finger on. He chalked it up to the usual teenage struggles, growing pains, mood swings, maybe even the lingering effects of losing his mother when he was just a child. But nothing could have prepared Mark for the horrifying truth that was about to unfold. It all started with small, easily dismissible things. Doors left slightly open when they should have been closed. The faint sound of whispers in the middle of the night when Tyler was supposed to be asleep. Strange, shadowy movements caught in his peripheral vision that disappeared the moment he turned his head. At first, Mark convinced himself it was exhaustion, maybe even his mind playing tricks on him. He worked long hours, often coming home late and too drained to think straight. But then came the real turning point, the moment he could no longer ignore the gnawing sense that something was terribly wrong. One night, while searching for his missing car keys, Mark stumbled upon something in Tyler's room that made his blood run cold. His hands trembled as he lifted the object, his pulse pounding in his ears. The walls of the room seemed to close in around him as an overwhelming sense of dread settled deep in his gut. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This wasn't something he could explain away. His son, his quiet, distant, mysterious son, was hiding something. And whatever it was, Mark knew it wasn't just a phase. It was something much, much worse. But the real terror. This was only the beginning. Mark stood frozen in the dimly lit bedroom, his breath shallow as he stared at the object in his hands. His mind raced, grasping for some logical explanation, but nothing made sense. He had always known Tyler was different, quiet, thoughtful, withdrawn, but never in a way that set off alarms. Until now. He thought back over the last few weeks, searching for any sign he had overlooked, any moment that should have made him pause. There were plenty. Tyler had been staying out later than usual, coming home with a faraway look in his eyes, as if he had been somewhere else entirely. He barely spoke at dinner, answering in vague, clipped responses when Mark pressed him about where he had been. His grades, once steady and reliable, had started slipping, but teachers never reported behavioral issues, only a strange, unshakable detachment. It was like his son was drifting, slipping into a version of himself that Mark no longer recognized. Then there were the nights. The whispers, the shifting shadows, the uneasy feeling that Mark wasn't alone, even when he was sure he was. At first, he convinced himself it was stress, his mind playing tricks on him after too many long shifts at the factory. But when he woke one night to the sound of faint scratching outside his bedroom door, his chest tightened with an unnamed fear. He had swung the door open, expecting to find Tyler sleepwalking, or maybe their old house cat pawing at the floor. Instead, he found nothing, just the silent, oppressive darkness of the hallway stretching before him. He had shrugged it off, but deep down, something in his gut told him this wasn't normal. The real worry set in when he started noticing changes in Tyler's social life, specifically the people he had been spending time with. Tyler had never been the popular type, always preferring solitude over large crowds, but he had at least maintained a small, close-knit circle of friends. Lately, though, those friends had stopped coming around. Mark had caught glimpses of them in passing whispers, exchanged in the school parking lot, uneasy glances in the grocery store. They avoided eye contact, their expressions tense, almost fearful. And then there were the new friends, the ones Mark had never seen before, figures lurking at the end of the driveway late at night, silhouettes in hooded sweatshirts just out of reach of the porch light. Mark had tried asking Tyler about them once, casually, over dinner. The reaction was immediate. His son's face went blank, his grip tightening around his fork as he muttered something about just some kids from school before excusing himself from the table. Mark wasn't the type to panic. He had spent his entire life solving problems with reason and patience, believing that there was always an explanation, always a way to fix things. But this was different. The more he paid attention, the more questions piled up with no answers in sight. Where had Tyler been sneaking off to at night? Why did he flinch when Mark mentioned the missing neighborhood cat that had yet to be found? What was in that heavy padlocked box Mark had once spotted under his son's bed, the one Tyler had quickly shoved out of sight when he realized he wasn't alone? And, more importantly, why did Mark feel an overwhelming sense of dread every time he looked into his son's eyes? There was only one way to get to the truth. Mark needed to dig deeper, to push past the excuses and half-truths. But as he stood there in Tyler's bedroom, gripping the object that sent a chill down his spine, he had the sickening realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't prepared for the answers he was about to uncover. Mark's fingers tightened around the object, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to believe it was nothing, that he was overreacting, that stress and exhaustion were making him see ghosts where there were none. But deep down, he knew better. This was real. This was something dangerous, something that changed everything. Just as he was about to shove it into his pocket, the sound of a car door slamming outside made him jump. He quickly returned the object to its place and stepped back, heart racing, as he heard Tyler's familiar footsteps approaching the front door. For a brief moment, he considered confronting his son right then and there, demanding an explanation. But some deep, instinctual fear told him to wait, to be careful. Whatever was going on, Tyler wasn't acting alone. And if Mark wanted the truth, he had to play this smart. The next day, determined to get some answers, Mark decided to retrace his son's recent steps. He drove past the school, scanning the faces of the kids outside, searching for the unfamiliar ones he had seen lurking near their house. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, just as he was about to leave, he spotted one of them, a tall, lanky boy with a hood pulled low over his face, standing alone by the back fence. Mark slowed the car, watching as the boy took a step back, eyes darting around as if he knew he was being watched. Something about the way he moved, cautious yet deliberate, made Mark uneasy. He hesitated for only a second before deciding to approach. But the moment he opened his car door, the boy took off, disappearing behind the school building before Mark could call out. It was almost as if he had been expecting him. That night, as Mark sat at the kitchen table, replaying the encounter in his mind, something else went missing, something he hadn't touched in years. An old family photo, the one that had always sat in the hallway, was gone. Not fallen, not misplaced, just gone. He searched the house, growing more frustrated by the second, but it was nowhere to be found. It didn't make sense. Tyler never cared about the picture before, so why now? And more importantly, who else could have taken it? His gut told him this wasn't a coincidence. Then, just as the tension was settling into his chest like a lead weight, his phone buzzed. A message. No number, no name. Just 4 simple words that sent a shiver down his spine. Stop looking. Walk away. Mark stared at the screen, a creeping sense of unease twisting in his stomach. Someone knew he was digging. Someone was watching. And if they were sending warnings, it meant he was getting close to something they didn't want him to find. But what scared him even more was the sudden realization that maybe Tyler wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Maybe this went deeper than he ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one in danger. Mark's grip on his phone tightened as he read the message again, the words searing into his brain like a warning brandished in fire. His first instinct was to check on Tyler, to make sure he was still in his room, But something stopped him: fear, hesitation, or maybe the quiet realization that he wasn't sure what he would find if he opened that door. He had spent years believing he knew his son inside and out, but now, with every strange occurrence, every missing item, every shadow moving just out of sight, he felt that certainty slipping away like sand through his fingers. Whoever had sent that message wasn't just issuing a vague threat, they were speaking directly to him, as if they already knew his next move. And that meant one thing: he was being watched. But Mark wasn't the only one. Across town, in a dimly lit bookstore, just minutes before closing, Emily Vaughn felt a chill crawl up her spine as she stared at the crumpled note left on the counter. The shop had been empty all evening, the usual customers either home for the night or too wrapped up in their own lives to visit. She had been restocking shelves, lost in the mindless rhythm of her routine, when she returned to the register and found it waiting for her: a single scrap of paper, scrawled with the same 4 words: "Stop looking. Walk away." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she frantically scanned the store, but there was no one there. The door had been locked, the windows shut tight against the cold. Whoever had left it had done so without making a sound, slipping in and out like a ghost. But Emily knew better than to dismiss it as a prank. She had seen the signs before: the uneasy glances from strangers, the inexplicable feeling of being followed, the occasional misplaced item that made her question her own memory. She had ignored them, convinced herself she was imagining things. But now, with this note in her hands and a sickening sense of déjà vu settling in her stomach, she could no longer pretend. This wasn't random. Someone was trying to scare her. And deep down, she knew why. It had been years since she had last spoken to Mark Parker. Their lives had drifted in different directions, their connection weakened by time and unspoken regret. But as she stood there, her fingers trembling around the paper, she knew she had no choice. If she was being warned, then Mark was too. And that meant whatever was happening, it wasn't just about Tyler. It was bigger, more dangerous, more personal. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mark's thoughts churned with questions. Who else knew what was going on? Was Tyler in deeper trouble than he realized? And why did it feel like this had all started long before the first whispers in the night, before the missing photo, before the warning text? Then, just as his mind spun itself into knots, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't another threat. It was a name he hadn't seen on his screen in years. Emily Vaughn. Mark's grip on the phone tightened as Emily's voice crackled through the line, laced with something he hadn't heard from her before: fear. Real, raw fear. For years, Emily had been the type to stand her ground no matter what, never one to scare easily. But now, there was a shakiness in her breath, an urgency that sent a cold chill racing down his spine. He barely had time to ask what was going on before she spoke again, her words rushed, almost frantic. "I don't know what's happening, Mark, but it's not just you. Someone's been watching me. I thought I was imagining it at first, just a weird feeling, but tonight, someone left me a note. The exact same message you got." She hesitated, and he could hear the faint sound of movement in the background, as if she were pacing. "I don't know who they are, but they were close. Too close." Mark swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted them to stop asking questions, but why? What had Emily done to get dragged into this? He was about to ask when the hairs on the back of his neck suddenly stood on end. A strange sensation crawled over him, like the air in the room had shifted, thickened. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window, his stomach twisting into a knot. Outside, beneath the dim glow of the street lamp, a figure stood motionless at the edge of his driveway. His breath caught in his throat. The person, whoever they were, was just far enough away that their face was hidden in shadow, but he could see them clearly enough to know they were watching him. Standing completely still, unmoving, just watching. A slow, creeping dread coiled in Mark's chest as every instinct in his body screamed at him to lock the doors, to shut the blinds, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But he couldn't look away. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he tightened his grip on the phone. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone's outside." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Mark, listen to me. Don't go out there." But Mark was already moving, his pulse pounding as he crossed the room in long, deliberate strides. He had been patient. He had been careful. But now he was done feeling like prey. His fingers curled around the doorknob, his muscles tensed, ready to confront whoever had been lurking in the shadows of his life. But just as he yanked the door open, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no movement, just empty, suffocating silence. Mark stood there, his breath uneven, scanning the street, the yards, the parked cars, nothing. It was impossible. They had been right there, close enough that he could feel their presence, the weight of their stare pressing into him like a physical force. But now, nothing. The only sign that anything had been there at all was the lingering sense of unease crawling under his skin like a sickness. Slowly, he closed the door, locking it behind him, his thoughts a chaotic mess. Whoever this was, they weren't just sending warnings anymore. They were making it clear he was being watched, hunted, and the worst part, they were always one step ahead. As he turned back toward the kitchen, his phone buzzed again. He didn't want to look. Every part of him screamed to just turn it off, to pretend none of this was happening. But he knew he couldn't. With a deep breath, he glanced down at the screen. New message. No number. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was something worse. A photo of Tyler, asleep in his bed, taken from inside the house. Mark's body went cold as he stared at the photo on his phone. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Tyler, lying in his bed, peaceful and unaware, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a camera flash. Someone had been inside the house. Someone had stood in that very room, close enough to reach out and touch his son, and Mark hadn't heard a thing. His stomach twisted with a sickening mix of terror and fury. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a violation, a message that whoever was behind this had already crossed the line. They weren't just watching. They were inside his world, slipping through the cracks of his life like a shadow he couldn't catch. He bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, heart hammering against his ribs. Bursting into Tyler's room, he barely registered the rush of air as he flicked on the light. His son stirred, groggy and disoriented, blinking up at him with confusion. "Dad?" Tyler's voice was thick with sleep, his brow furrowing at the sight of his father standing there panting, wild-eyed. Mark's gaze darted around the room, searching for any sign of forced entry, anything out of place. But there was nothing. No open window. No disturbed furniture. Just the quiet rise and fall of his son's breath and the weight of an unseen presence that still lingered in the air. Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He couldn't let Tyler see his fear. Not yet. "Did you hear anything?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. Tyler rubbed his eyes, shaking his head. "No." "What's going on?" Mark hesitated. How much should he tell him? How much could he tell him? He thought back to the strange behavior, the late nights, the people Tyler had been hanging around the pieces of a puzzle that never quite fit together. He had spent weeks wondering if his son was keeping secrets. But now, for the first time, a chilling new question crept into his mind. Was Tyler the one in danger? Or was he the reason all of this was happening? Before he could say another word, his phone vibrated again. His breath caught as he lifted it with a shaking hand. Another message. This time, it wasn't a picture. Just a single sentence that sent ice through his veins. "Ask him about the fire." Mark's blood ran cold. His grip on the phone tightened as the words burned into his mind. The fire. The one thing he had spent years trying to forget. The tragedy that had nearly destroyed his life, that had left behind nothing but ashes and unanswered questions. No one was supposed to know about that. No one. He turned back to Tyler, his son now sitting up fully, watching him with a guarded expression. And in that moment, Mark saw something unsettling. Tyler wasn't just confused anymore. He was tense, almost expectant, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The ground beneath Mark's world suddenly felt unsteady. Everything he thought he knew, everything he had been chasing, was shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't about missing cats, or cryptic messages, or hooded figures at the edge of his driveway. This was about something much older, much deeper. And somehow, Tyler was connected to it. Mark's heart pounded as realization set in. He had been asking all the wrong questions. This wasn't about finding out what was happening to his son. It was about finding out what his son had been hiding from him. Mark felt like the walls of his own home were closing in on him, suffocating him with the weight of the unknown. His pulse roared in his ears as he lowered his phone, his gaze locking onto Tyler's. The boy, his son, sat perfectly still on the bed, his expression unreadable, his breathing measured. And that was what terrified Mark the most. Not the messages, not the shadowy figure outside, not even the sickening knowledge that someone had been inside their house. No, the real terror came from the look in Tyler's eyes. Not confusion, not fear. Something else. Something Mark couldn't name, but that made every instinct in his body scream that something was deeply, deeply wrong. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched thick between them, heavy with unspoken words, until Mark finally forced himself to move. He sat on the edge of the bed, gripping his phone tightly like a lifeline, like proof that he hadn't lost his mind. He kept his voice even, careful, as if he were standing on the edge of a crumbling ledge. "Tyler," he said slowly, choosing his words like a man defusing a bomb, "what do you know about the fire?" A flicker, brief but unmistakable, passed across Tyler's face. His jaw tightened, his fingers twitching against the sheets. And in that instant, Mark knew. He knew. Whatever had happened all those years ago, whatever ghosts still haunted the ruins of that night, Tyler was connected to it in ways Mark had never imagined. For a moment, it seemed like his son might answer. His lips parted, his posture stiffening. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. The flicker, the hesitation, and what replaced it sent a cold shiver racing down Mark's spine. Tyler's shoulders relaxed, his face smoothing into something controlled, practiced. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady. Too steady. "I was a kid. I don't remember anything." A lie. A perfect, calculated lie. Mark felt the ground beneath him shift, the foundation of trust between them cracking, splintering. He had spent his life protecting this boy, loving him, believing he understood every part of him. But now, sitting in this dimly lit room, staring at a stranger wearing his son's face, he realized something gut-wrenching. Tyler wasn't scared. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't grasping for answers the way Mark was. Tyler was in control. The realization made Mark's stomach turn. He wanted to believe this was still about protecting his son, about shielding him from whatever danger had wrapped itself around their lives. But what if he was wrong? What if he was looking in the wrong direction? What if this wasn't about keeping Tyler safe? What if it was about keeping everyone else safe from Tyler? The thought barely had time to settle before Mark's phone buzzed again. Another message. His breath hitched as he glanced down, dread slithering through him before he even read the words. "He's lying to you." Mark's blood ran ice cold. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone knew. Someone was watching, pulling the strings from the shadows, pushing him toward a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. His head snapped up, his heart hammering against his ribs, as he met his son's gaze once more. But Tyler was already sliding off the bed, his movements calm, effortless. "I'm going to bed," he said, his voice eerily normal, as if this was just another night, as if nothing had just unraveled between them. And Mark? Mark just sat there, gripping his phone like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He watched as his son, his own flesh and blood, turned his back and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. And for the first time in his life, Mark realized he wasn't just afraid for Tyler. He was afraid of him. Mark couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, staring at the last message on his phone, the glow of the screen barely illuminating his clenched hands. "He's lying to you." The words echoed in his head, looping over and over like a slow, creeping infection. The more he tried to ignore them, the deeper they burrowed. Tyler had looked him in the eyes and lied without a flicker of hesitation. That was bad enough. But the worst part, Mark didn't know why. What was his son hiding? And who the hell was sending these messages, pulling him deeper into something that felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from? His fingers hovered over his phone screen before he finally made a choice. Enough? He wasn't waiting anymore. He scrolled through his contacts, found the one name he had been avoiding, and pressed call. Emily picked up on the second ring. "Mark?" Her voice was tight, alert. He could tell she hadn't slept either. "Something's wrong," he said, keeping his voice low, his eyes flicking toward the hallway, half expecting Tyler to be standing there in the dark. "Tyler knows something. He's lying to me, and I don't think he's the only one." There was a pause. Then a slow exhale. "You need to get out of that house." A chill ran down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "Listen to me, Mark. I didn't want to say anything until I knew for sure, but I've been digging. Those messages we got, we weren't the only ones. There are others. People who got the same warnings, the same threats. And they all have one thing in common." She hesitated, as if bracing for impact. "They're kids." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "What?" "They're sons," Emily said, voice urgent now. "All of them. Every single person who got a message has a son around Tyler's age. And the worst part, some of them," she stopped, and for the first time, he heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. Dread. "Some of them what?" He pressed. The silent understanding. The connection that had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. "You should have stayed out of it," Emily finally said, her voice quiet but heavy with meaning. Mark's hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Tyler. It wasn't even just about him. It was something bigger, older, more controlled than he had ever imagined. "How long?" His voice was raw, strained, barely holding back the flood of emotions clawing their way to the surface. Emily didn't flinch. "Since before the fire." Mark staggered back, his breath coming sharp and uneven. Before the fire. His entire world tilted, memories crashing into him all at once. The fire had taken everything. His home, his career, his peace. And he had spent years believing it was an accident, an unsolvable tragedy that had burned away the life he had built. But it wasn't. It never was. Mark's pulse roared in his ears as the small flame danced between Tyler's fingers, its glow casting long flickering shadows on the walls. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the years he had spent blind to the truth, pressed down on him like an avalanche, suffocating, unrelenting. Emily stood beside Tyler now, no longer the woman he thought he knew, but something else entirely. An enemy. A conspirator. His mind raced. Since before the fire. The words clung to him, thick and suffocating. His life had unraveled that night, his home turned to ash, his reputation destroyed, his sense of security ripped from him in an instant. He had spent years searching for a reason, for closure, and now, standing in the dim glow of the flame, He realized the truth had been right in front of him all along. His son, his best friend, they had been part of it. Mark took a slow, deliberate step back, his hands raised slightly, not in surrender, but in calculation. He needed time, needed a way to turn this against them. If they wanted him to come quietly, they wouldn't kill him. Not yet. That meant he had a chance. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low, careful. Tyler's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was Emily who spoke first. "Yes, we do." Something in her tone sent a chill through him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hatred. It was certainty. The kind that came from someone who had been planning this for a long, long time. The lighter clicked shut, plunging the room into darkness. Then came the sound, a low, rumbling creak from upstairs. Mark stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. That sound. It wasn't them. It wasn't him. Someone else was in the house. Emily and Tyler heard it too. He saw it in the way their bodies tensed, the way Tyler's fingers tightened around the lighter, the way Emily's head snapped toward the stairwell. A slow, deliberate knock echoed from above. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. His house had been empty. It was just the three of them. But now it wasn't. Emily's fingers twitched toward her coat pocket. Mark didn't wait to find out what she was reaching for. He lunged. His shoulder slammed into Tyler, knocking the lighter from his grasp as he wrenched his son backward. Tyler cried out, but Mark was already moving, twisting toward Emily, just as her hand yanked something from her pocket, a knife, gleaming even in the darkness. She slashed, but he was faster, grabbing her wrist and twisting. She gasped in pain as the blade clattered to the floor, but before he could fully disarm her, Tyler was on him. The force of the tackle sent them crashing into the wall. Mark barely had time to recover before Tyler's hands were at his throat, shoving him back. He was strong, too strong. Mark struggled, gasping as spots flickered in his vision. But then, another knock, louder this time. 3 deliberate, heavy pounds against the floorboards above them. The sound was so unnatural, so deliberate, that even Tyler hesitated. His grip loosened just enough for Mark to shove him off and stagger to his feet. Emily was already scrambling toward the stairs, her breath coming fast, sharp. "We have to go," she hissed. "Now?" But Tyler wasn't moving. He was staring at the ceiling, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. Mark followed his gaze, his own breath shuddering as he realized what Tyler was seeing. The attic door. It was open. A slow, dragging noise scraped through the silence. A whisper of movement. Mark felt his stomach drop. There was someone up there. Watching. Listening. Waiting. And then they stepped forward. A figure. A shape barely visible in the darkness. But as the dim light caught them, Mark's breath hitched in his throat. It started like any other day, on the set of a Hollywood film, cameras rolling, actors in position, crew members focused on their tasks. But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. A shot rang out. A woman collapsed. Panic spread through the small group gathered around the scene, their faces shifting from concentration to confusion, then to absolute horror. At first, some thought it was part of the script, a mere accident of timing. But as the weight of the moment settled in, it became clear this was no rehearsed stunt. Something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. What was meant to be just another day of filming for the Western movie, Rust, had turned into a crime scene. The legendary actor Alec Baldwin, a man who had spent decades in front of the camera, now found himself at the center of a real-life tragedy, one that would spark a firestorm of questions, controversy, and legal battles that remain unresolved to this day. The victim? Cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, a rising star in the film industry, known for her passion, talent, and an unrelenting drive to bring stories to life. As medics rushed to her side, desperate to save her, the weight of the situation settled onto every person on that set. How could a prop gun, something meant to be harmless, end a life in an instant? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, who was responsible? Law enforcement arrived quickly, their radios crackling with updates as they attempted to make sense of what had just happened. But the deeper they looked, the stranger the case became. A mix of confusion, conflicting statements, and an eerie sense that something wasn't quite right left even the most seasoned detectives at a loss for words. This wasn't a simple accident, at least not in the traditional sense. It was a puzzle, filled with missing pieces, blurred lines between negligence and intent, and an industry grappling with one of its worst on-set tragedies. As details began to emerge, one thing became certain: this was a case that would change Hollywood forever. But before we dive deeper into the controversy, the legal battles, and the shocking discoveries that followed, let's go back to the beginning, to the moment everything unraveled. Because sometimes, the truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's far more disturbing. For weeks, everything seemed ordinary in the small suburban neighborhood where the family lived. The father, Greg, had always been the quiet, hard-working type, often coming home late from his job as a corporate manager. His wife, Carla, was known for her charm and her ability to keep the house running smoothly. They were the kind of couple everyone envied: organized, poised, and always smiling in public. But behind the walls of their picture-perfect home, things were slowly beginning to unravel. Their teenage daughter, Emma, had started acting strange in the weeks leading up to the discovery. She'd grown withdrawn, speaking less and avoiding eye contact with anyone. It wasn't like her to be distant. She used to be the heart of family dinners, always laughing and sharing stories from school. But lately, she seemed distracted, almost haunted, as if she was carrying a burden far too heavy for someone her age. When the police first arrived, they had come for a completely unrelated matter: a missing dog from a neighbor's yard. But once they entered the family's home, they couldn't ignore the unsettling vibe that clung to the place. Something felt off. Maybe it was the awkward silence that filled the air when Greg and Carla greeted them, or the way Emma stared at them with a strange, almost pleading expression, as if she wanted to tell them something but couldn't find the words. As the investigation began, the hidden camera was discovered in Emma's room, tucked cleverly behind a framed picture. It was the last thing anyone expected, especially given how Greg and Carla had always portrayed themselves as perfect, loving parents. The camera wasn't just a surveillance device. It was positioned in a way that suggested something far more sinister. It wasn't long before rumors began to swirl around the neighborhood. Some neighbors started to recall strange things they'd seen Greg and Carla arguing late into the night, whispers of mysterious meetings, and strange people coming and going from their house at odd hours. But even more chilling were the whispers about Emma's relationship with a few classmates. Some had heard stories about her making secretive phone calls late at night, speaking in hushed tones as if she was trying to hide something from the world. As the police continued their investigation, new and unexpected obstacles began to surface. Just when they thought they were getting close to the truth, something strange happened. The hidden camera footage, which could have been the key to unlocking the mystery, mysteriously vanished. It wasn't just erased from the system, it was as if it had never existed at all.